Hi, my name is Alec Gerbec with Umpqua Feather Merchants, and today we'll be tying my polar prawn. This is going to be a new fly available for 2021. Excited to show you the ropes on it. Originally came up with this fly while guiding over in the Seychelles, but its application is going to be any saltwater fishery that's going to have bonefish or permit that are interested in shrimp or large prawn. I'm going to be using a size 2 Umpqua X Series 410 hook. I grabbed some tan 210 denier thread, and I'm going to just lay a nice little thread base where I'm going to be putting my barbell eyes. As far as my placement on the barbell eyes, I want to give myself just a little bit of room in front of them so I have a place to tie in the wing. So I'm going to come in, just give a couple wraps on either side, kind of check my distance from the eye, make sure they're centered before I continue with my wraps to latch it down. So now I'm just going to kind of figure 8, and I'm going to come underneath and give it some securing wraps as well. Okay. Pretty happy with that. Now before I start tying in materials, I'm just going to bring my thread all the way to the bend of the hook, laying down a nice thread base so my materials sit nicely. And then I come right back behind the eyes. I'm going to be using a sand-colored polar fiber. Just going to cut a small piece off the hide. If you've seen my videos before, I'm all about this just to keep my patch nice and neat as I'm working. Way I'm not dealing with something I'm not sure how long the hair is. So I've just got like a little square of it. I'm going to kind of clean it up a little bit. And I'm going to cut off that hide. So there's some pretty long fibers, but I like this amount of material. I'm actually just going to pinch those long fibers and bring them back so they're just a touch shorter even with the rest of the material. And then as far as this tail or mouthpieces, whatever you want to call it, it's going to be about the length of the hook shank, maybe a little bit longer. We'll tie it in, touching turns as I come back. Okay. And cut off this excess. Okay, next we're going to be adding some eyes to the fly. So I've got some pre-made mono eyes that I've burnt and colored up myself. So I'm just going to grab a pair of these. And before I latch it down all the way, I'm just going to do about 5 turns and then get it in place as far as the length goes. I'll bring in that one on the other side, even up those eyes. Give it a couple wraps, give it one more look. Looks like I need to go a little bit longer on one side. There we go. And so now when I latch down these eyes, I want the mono to run along the side of the body. I want quite a nice flat hook shank to work with, if you will. Okay, so yeah, I've got those hook shanks, or mono eye shanks on either side of the hook shank to make it nice and flat. Be nice to work with here. I'm just going to push those eyes out a little bit. Train them off to the side. Okay, now I'm going to be adding some rubber legs. You can use any which ones you want here. I'm just going to today be using a grizzly flutter leg. Chacon's crusher legs are also very good. I'm just going to double it up, cut it in half. Then when I tie it in, I'm going to tie it in off-centered, just so all 4 legs aren't the same length. So the ones that are going to be facing back are going to be the longer, and then the ones that I'm tying that are facing this one are going to be shorter. So it's just going to be 1 or 2 wraps of thread, and then I'm going to fold it over, kind of train it in place, okay? Okay, next I'm going to be using a saltwater Flashaboo. It's wide, it's kind of that size you'd see on a Dalai Lama or something like that. This is pearl in color. Just tie it in on the top. Just give it a couple wraps. I'm going to center it up. And I don't need this full length, so I'm going to cut it in half and use it for the other side of the hook. Okay, so kind of an important piece is I'm coming back now, I'm touching turns, but I'm trying to keep that Flashaboo centered on the hook shank. You're going to see this next process. I'm going to be X-wrapping material and then bringing this pearl body over it. Just kind of like a merkin style with this added flash. So I've brought that back all the way to where my eyes and tail are coming out, and we can pause there. All right, so for the body, I'm going to be using EP fibers in this tan color. One little trick for you guys, if you've ever used these materials before, you know once you pull them out of the bag, it's hard to get it back in there and hard to manage. So one of the things I do is right as I open the package, I just bring the top of it out and I put a little zip tie around it, and it's a lot easier to manage. So for this body that I'm going to be tying on the polar prawn, it's going to be a merkin style body, so X-wrapping a bunch of this material as I come forward. So I'm just going to be cutting off small amounts like this throughout the video. This part's pretty repetitive, but this on this first one, I will kind of give you one of the tricks of the trade to keep it nice and uniform. So I'm going to give 2 wraps on one side. I'm going to try to keep enough length here so I can trim it later. And now I'm just going to bring my thread onto the other side of that short side and 1 wrap, X-wrap going over the other side. I'm going to give 2 wraps in front of it. That kind of locks all that thread work in place. So now I have these 2 pieces of Flashaboo. I'm going to bring one over the top. One over the bottom. Okay, just give it a couple wraps. Now I'm going to fold back and wrap back over it. And so you'll see I kind of just keep this attached to the fly while I'm doing the whole flash piece. Just keeps it organized, and you're going to lose a lot less fibers as you're working forward. So I'm going to start again, just tying this in with 2 wraps on the top of the shank. 1, 2. While I'm still holding it, I've now snuck that thread behind it, given it 1 wrap. Again, now I can kind of situate it back into place where I want it to live, nice and tight to the other one. Come through with 1 more tight wrap. Then give 2 wraps up front. So that's kind of the trick. Now it's just going to be repetitive all the way to the front of the fly, just doing that over and over again, bringing that flash over the top, flash over the bottom. Oop. Okay. This is the time when you can do one of those really cool edits where it fast forward, because I'm going to do the same thing over and over again. Quite nice having a rotary vise for this, just so you can check your work, make sure you're getting in there nice and even with the flash. So I've gotten to about this length. This is the last time I'm going to be able to use this. I could probably fudge 1 more, but just to play it safe, and as you can see, I have plenty of this material to work with. So again, just keeping it pinched in the fingers. 2 wraps. Before I let go of these 2 fingers, I'm going to sneak that thread behind it. Seat it in place. In total, you're going to have about 7 segments, if proportioned right. Okay. Again, just a small clump. If you had to figure out a way where I can truly get a uniform amount every single time, it's just, you kind of get a feel for that amount. Someone's got to come up with a great tool at one of these at some point. Okay, again, starting at the end of all these fibers. It's not a difficult fly, it's just kind of time consuming. Once I'm done, you'll see I'm going to trim it up nicely to give it a nice thin profile. Some pretty untraditional ways of using the bobbin too. It's kind of switching hands and just trying to manage that material. I have one more after this one. So sometimes you're going to have a hard time getting that thread through there. I just kind of come back and forth with that thread using my fingers to tease that material off to the side of the thread. Okay, last time. As far as finishing this flash, I'm going to come over the rest of the tie-ins like I just did. And then I'm going to kind of bridge the gap over the barbell eyes, tying it down. Just behind the eye of the hook. Okay, I'm going to give it a couple wraps and I can cut free this flash-a-doo. Okay, so you can see quite a bushy mess there. I need to trim this down. I'm going to trim it once. Now it's going to be a pretty rough cut, and then I'll trim it once more once I'm finished with the fly. So I'm just going to take the material, kind of seat it nice and flat one last time, twisting it into place. And now when I make my cut, I'm going to cut at an angle essentially from the eye of the hook to the bend of the hook, or to the point of the hook, excuse me. So you're going to kind of have this taper as it goes back towards the back of the fly. So the trick here is I'm going to now fold this up, try not to grab any rubber legs or tail fibers. Okay, so there we are. Again, this is going to be a rough cut, so I'm just going to kind of place my scissors on the eye of the hook and trim it. And you can see there's already a taper happening there. We are going for shrimp, not a crab, so you've got kind of a big crab body right now. So that can just kind of live like that for now, and I'll show you how I'm going to trim that in a second. So the last part of the fly is just dressing it with a wing. The reason I've used that flash on either side of the fly like this, typically it's a bunch of crystal flash under a wing. I just wanted to subtle it down a little bit with that pearl flash. So it gives it some really cool texture of that kind of shrimp back. Meanwhile, it's still hiding underneath this translucent polar fiber. So I'm going to grab a piece of black crystal flash. I think a really cool feature in a lot of or not many shrimp flies, is to add a vein into it. Just some nice contrast that sticks out on those flats. Those fish, I think, are looking for any little subtle irregularities in color out there, and that's how they find their shrimp. So, okay, I'm going to take some more polar fiber in that sand color. Cut a touch off the hide. Just going to kind of fold it in place in my fingers. Clean it up a little bit. And just like I did the tail, I'm going to cut off that hide. And now I'm going to match up some of those longer pieces. So I'm just going to kind of pinch and hold and then recenter so they're all the same length. So now this is going to go over the vein I tied in. As far as the length of the wing, I wanted about the length of the tail. So I'm just going to match it up. I come in, pinch it with my other fingers. Give it a couple wraps. Make sure it's nice and centered, looks good. Give it a few more wraps and then I'm going to trim this excess off. Okay, so just done with the fly. Now I'm just going to clean up the head and whip finish. And cut out. Okay, so before I glue the fly, I'm going to do that one final trim. So I'm going to be using a dubbing loop tweezer as a kind of guideline for my scissors. I'm going to take the fly out of the vise. I'm going to try to get all that wing and stuff kind of out of the way before I pinch onto it. I'm going to line up the point of the scissors to the barbell eye. The tip of the tweezers to the point, or the top of the barbell eye, and then I'm going to use a pair of scissors to run along the sides of it. Okay, so you got a nice flat line to work with. You have a little bit up here that will trim after the fact, so I'm going to do it on the other side of the fly now. Okay, before you start cutting with the scissors, just check both sides. Make sure you haven't grabbed a rubber leg or something like that. Again, I'm just going to run some scissors along the sides of those tweezers. Just drop this back in the vise now. Now I've made that final trim, I'm just going to have a look and see if there's any stray fibers sticking out of the bottom, the sides. Trim any of those out of place. Honestly, they won't be an issue if they're there, but if you want to make that perfect little prawn, just take the time to kind of trim some of those pieces out of there. So you can see it kind of has a wedge shape. That's really going to allow that front of the fly to be more aerodynamic than the back, so it's going to drop nice and vertical and get this nice kind of jiggy, shrimpy look as you're swimming it. So yeah, this is the polar prawn. I do it in a size 2, 4, or 6. All the sizes kind of have different weights, so the size 2's got the heaviest weight. As you get smaller, it gets lighter. So yeah, now that I've done all my final trimming, I'm just going to hit it with some glue up front, on the top, and on the bottom. So some of the cool other variations you could do is you could actually use like an orange thread under there or different legs, things like that. So you can really kind of customize it to the fishery. You know, I know a lot of the guys in the Bahamas, they like some sort of orange feature on the fly, so they would add that. I do a white version as well. That was my more preferred version on the white sand flats of the Seychelles. So anyway, that's the polar prawn.